Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time it is a review of the 2019 horror thriller, The Fanatic. Now, this is one of those movies that has been getting absolutely destroyed by critics. It's been put on multiple people's worst of 2019 lists. It's been considered one of the worst films of the past year. And for some, they've even said it's one of the worst films they've ever seen. And after seeing the movie, I don't feel the same way. I don't really think this is one of the worst films that I've seen from 2019, let alone one of the worst films I've ever seen. I personally felt that this film has a lot more going for it than a lot of people are giving it credit for. But that being said, I'm not here to defend The Fanatic. At best, it's an average movie. Because it is a train wreck at times. It's incoherent. It's all over the place with its narrative. And it doesn't even have a real ending. It feels incomplete. And the film definitely does have its fair share of moments that make you shake your head or make you cringe. So I totally get why people don't like this film or why it's on their worst of 2019 list, but I don't get why people would rank it all the way up at the top or say it's one of the worst films they've seen in the past decade. Like, I think that's a bit much because I personally feel there are much more worse films out there than The Fanatic, especially in the realm of independent direct-to-video horror or thriller films. This at least had some solid performances by a good chunk of the cast. The direction was surprisingly decent by Fred Durst, and even though the story was all over the place, it still had its moments of creativity and its moments that it ended up grabbing you and maintaining your attention. So, in some ways, this film is a success, and in other ways, this movie is a failure. So it's directed by Fred Durst, and yes, the same Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit fame. Uh, and I know he's been getting absolutely smacked around by critics and by a lot of people. They've been saying his direction was trash, it was incompetent, it was the worst. And I really don't get that at all. I think that his direction in this is actually pretty solid. I think it's actually pretty decent for a direct-to-video, low-budget, independent production. Um, I can't think of any sequences in this movie that I felt were incompetently shot. It's not like the camera was shaking everywhere. It's not like he was trying to do artsy fartsy direction where he's doing Dutch angles and shit. The direction I thought was solid for what it was and for who was behind the camera. It was definitely at least serviceable. It wasn't anything amazing. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it was a little bit surprising considering all of the shade that had been thrown at Fred Durst when it comes to his direction. I thought this direction was going to be awful, and I didn't really see that at all. He did a pretty good job getting the most out of the locations, even used some time-lapse photography at certain moments. I thought, in particular, the way he shot the daydream sequences in the film were well done. And the sequences in Hunter Dunbar's home in the climax, with not a whole lot of lighting, I thought were shot pretty well too. Um, I didn't think the direction was really that flat. I felt it had a good enough bit of dynamic to it. It was just one of those things where I thought the direction was fine. I didn't really see the direction of the film as really a problem. I thought Fred Durst actually did a pretty good job for a first time director for his first feature length film. Where the biggest problem with the Fanatic lies is its screenplay by Dave Beckerman and Fred Durst. Now, apparently, this is loosely based on a true story, some series of events in Fred Durst's life, and where he had a stalker fan who crossed the line, and that's where the genesis of this film comes from. And I think in some ways, his point of view definitely does add to this movie because he has experience with this as someone in the public eye. He knows for a fact that some fans really are nuts. They can go from fan to stalker in moments. So so he knows that firsthand. But that being said, he's not that experienced with writing a film, so I really do feel he really would have benefited a lot from having another writer. Someone else to come in and add their point of view and to add some more experience to the screenplay and to the writing process. Because if you had someone who had more experience, you would have less moments where the movie becomes incoherent. Like, you have a subplot involving a pickpocket on the Hollywood Strip, and it looks like it's dropped at one point in the movie because the guy who's working with him quits. And then moments later, it seems like moments later, it isn't moments later, but a few sequences later in the film, he's back to pickpocketing, and he's back with the same guy that quit before. And then it's just that this whole subplot just keeps going back and forth. It goes back and forth from he's done, he's trying to get John Travolta's character Moose to replace the guy that he had working with him, but that's not working out. Then he's back with the guy, then he's not with the guy anymore. It's just, that's the kind of thing that with a more seasoned writer, that would be cut out. That would be trimmed down. That would make more sense. The same thing goes for the ending of the movie, which really feels rushed and as if they didn't really have a clear idea of how they wanted to end the film, so they just stopped writing. That's another thing that would have been improved upon or outright solved with another writer. And the same thing goes with some of the questionable lines of dialogue and choices that the film has. I mean, on one hand, some of the lines of dialogue are funny, and I do get a kick out of them. Other moments, though, are cringe-inducing and really not necessary. I mean, when the first time you hear John Travolta's character speak, his line of dialogue is, "I gotta poo." It's really not a line that anyone really wanted to hear, let alone see. And it's just a really bad way to start your film. And with a better writer, they would look at that and realize that that would be the case, and that would either not even be in the film at all, or would be somewhere else where it might be a bit more suitable. Might have also taken out the narration, because the narration just, I don't know, seems a little hacky at times. The script could have been worse, but it also could have been a lot better. Now, where the film really manages to shine, if you ask me, is with its performances. I know John Travolta has been getting a lot of flack for his performance as Moose, an autistic fan. And I can see why some people think it's a bad performance if they're just looking at the over the top moments with his character. But if you look past some of those moments and some of those times where John Travolta takes things a little bit too over the top and goes into Nicolas Cage territory, I think you can actually see a really legitimately good performance from a capable and talented actor. I really appreciate John Travolta's performance in this film, and the reason why is this is a humiliating, embarrassing, degrading role. It's something where it just destroys your ego. And you rarely see an actor like John Travolta, who has been an A-lister, who has been a leading man in numerous films, who's been used to being the face of a franchise. Very rarely do you see an actor like that take on a role like this. I mean, he totally committed to this role. He shaved his head in that ridiculous, stupid haircut. He went all out with this, did not hold back, and in some instances, maybe he should have. But I think this unhinged, this all-out performance, I think that comes with the territory. I don't think it would be as good as it is if he did hold things back a little bit. Because in a lot of ways, this is just John Travolta playing in the sandbox. And Fred Durst just stepping back and letting him do whatever he wants. And I personally thought it was a really compelling, captivating performance that definitely kept me glued to the screen and made me laugh. And in other times made me actually sympathize with the character. One of the more standout, trying to think of the better way to put it. One of the most standout sequences in the film is when Moose has his mental breakdown. When he realizes that his idol, Hunter Dunbar, is not this nice guy. He's not who he thought he was. And he just breaks down and tears up all the memorabilia and burns them and has this just total breakdown. And despite a line of dialogue, which ultimately is a little bit comical, Hunter Dunbar, more like Hunter Dunbar, but after that bit of over-the-top hilariousness, it's actually a legitimately good performance of a damaged man going through a mental breakdown. So there are plenty of moments in this where John Travolta could win a Razzie, but then there's other moments in this where he can maybe get some Oscar buzz if there wasn't the Razzie moments. So that's why I don't side with John with this whole campaign for an Oscar for this, because the performance as a whole is not Oscar worthy. There are moments where you could argue that it could be, but the performance as a whole isn't Oscar worthy, and they don't give Oscars or nominations to performances that are only partly worthy of an Oscar. So I appreciate your performance, John, but it's not Oscar worthy. And I know he's gotten a lot of criticism for how he's portrayed this autistic man, and I don't quite get that either, because John Travolta had an autistic son. And the last thing he would want to do is degrade or poke fun at or mock his son, who is no longer with us. His son passed away. You gotta put things into context. Do you really think that John Travolta would actively do that? No. And people have criticized the whole rocking back and forth thing. That's a tick that legitimately does occur with autistic men and women sometimes. So I don't understand the criticisms at all for that, because that's something that actually does happen. It's not a stereotype. It actually is a legitimate thing. And I know people bring up the quote from Tropic Thunder, Robert Downey Jr., "You went full retard. Never go full retard." And, in some ways you could say this performance and this role is a prime example of that, but in other ways, it's just such a unique portrayal. It's something you rarely ever see. And I felt that Travolta, at times, actually took it seriously. It's not a simple Jack thing. He actually did take it seriously and tried to really bring a sense of authenticity to this character and to this role. And I also want to give credit to Devon Sawa as Hunter Dunbar, because I thought he was great too. I thought Devon Sawa, he did a great job playing this rough and tumble actor who's not necessarily a bad guy, but he's got his own issues. He has something that a lot of actors have, this personality that's fake around fans, but in their own environments they are something completely different. So it's one of those things where they smile in front of the camera, in front of the producers and the press and at the autograph signings, but in the back of their head they're kind of like, this shit sucks and is beneath me and blah 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 blah. And their own personal life, if something comes up in the middle of their signing, they're gonna be like, screw the fans. I gotta look out for me, because my life is more important. So I felt that Devon Sawa did a good job with that, portraying that kind of actor. And I also felt that he really did work well with John Travolta. In the climax of the film, I thought it was a really well done series of sequences. The back and forth between John Travolta and Devon Sawa in the climax, when Moose has him tied up and is playing all these tricks on him. And I felt that the two of them really did have some genuine chemistry and really did work well with one another. And he did a really phenomenal job with the intensity of the character, because that was something that was really necessary with Hunter Dunbar. You needed to show the intensity, the physicality of this character, and make it believable. And I felt that he did a remarkable job doing just that. He's come a long way since Little Giants, that's for sure. The rest of the cast is fine too. Anna Golja as Leah, Moose's friend. And there was a few other people were in the cast, and they did fine too. I wouldn't really consider anyone in the supporting cast as delivering a bad performance or doing a bad job. The cinematography by Conrad W. Hall, at moments it's kind of impressive. At other moments it's just average. So ultimately I would say it's just an average job in terms of the cinematography. Same way for the editing by Malcolm Crowe and Nick Voitas. The music by Gary Hickinson and John Swihart. At times it's actually rather solid. Like, there's a nice bit of tragic piano music that's used throughout the film, but at other times it's forgettable. So it's another instance of a score that's just adequate. One thing I wanted to mention as well about the film is its references to horror films and stuff like that, because Hunter Dunbar is a horror actor, and so The film has a lot of different references to the horror genre. John Travolta's character Moose is a big horror fan, and that's incorporated throughout lines of dialogue. There's even a flashback where he's watching Night of the Living Dead when he was a kid. He has a Night of the Living Dead reference, trying to get Hunter Dunbar to recognize it, but Hunter doesn't get it, and Moose is rather incredulous about that. In the finale, he dresses up as Jason Voorhees because he has the hockey mask on, but he also has Michael Myers' jumpsuit on. There are other moments where when Moose is looking through the Star Map app to try to find where Hunter Dunbar lives, he sees some houses, and one of the houses has the owner name of Jack Torrance from The Shining. So there are moments like that throughout the movie that, as a horror fan, it's definitely something that was fun to see. And one of my favorite scenes in the film, it's over the top, but it's funny, and I think it's supposed to be funny. There are moments in this movie that are definitely intentional bits of humor or dark humor. I don't think this film was trying to take itself seriously all the way through, because I think that really would be a mistake considering the subject material and considering what they're doing. But yeah, it's one of those things where there are some references sprinkled in throughout, not at the same high level as something like Fade to Black with Dennis Christopher, which needs to have a Blu-ray already. It's really honestly too bad that it hasn't gotten a Blu-ray release. I'm hoping sometime this year some company does it, because it's well deserved when it comes to that movie. This film is trying to do some things similar to that, but Fade to Black is a much better film. It's considerably higher quality movie in a multitude of different ways. That being said, I still didn't mind this movie. But anyway, I want to mention at least one quote from the film. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, where Moose has finally had enough of this pickpocket guy dicking him around, fucking with him. So he snaps and he chokes him. And so while he's strangling this guy, he's providing this insult only a horror fan would provide. I wish Freddy Krueger would come and chop off your head, and it would roll in the street, and a truck would squish it, and the blood would splatter everywhere, and everyone would watch it. I just got a kick out of that line. It cracked me up when I first saw the movie. And I'm a Freddy Krueger mark. I'm a Nightmare on Elm Street mark, so that's another reason why. So, yeah, I enjoyed that was a fun sequence. But the film, like I said, it ultimately suffers from a incoherent script that's all over the place, and from really cringe-inducing scenes. Like, I would probably say the most cringe-inducing moment in this movie is when the film stops just to remind you that Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit directed this movie, and he was in the band Limp Bizkit. Like, really, the movie just stops at a sudden halt and has a scene where Hunter Dunbar is driving with his son in his car, and he says, "You okay with some music? You like a little Limp Bizkit? Like a little biscuit? Yeah? Nice and loud? I used to listen to this back in the day. This is hot. Oh my god, that is nice. That is nice. Alright, here we go, baby." Yeah, just play some Limp Bizkit, talking to his son about how hot Limp Bizkit is. It was so fucking terrible. It was so on the nose and cringe. Oh my god. Fred Durst, you didn't have to go there. We know you are in Limp Bizkit. We do not need to be reminded that you are in the band Limp Bizkit in your movie that you're directing. There's just completely this self sponsorship was completely unnecessary and cringe. Just one of the most cringe-inducing scenes I've seen in a film from 2019. This just cringy self-endorsement by Fred Durst. And then you have the ending. Spoiler. I'm going to spoil the ending. It goes into a brutal direction that I did not see coming. That's really intense. Because Hunter Dunbar fools Moose. He tricks him after Moose tricked him earlier by faking him out. And a legitimately well-written sequence where the film makes it look as if Moose had killed himself and tied Dunbar up, but then Moose gets up, and it's all a trick. It's all an example of acting and makeup effects. He puts on the hockey mask and the jumpsuit and goes to stab Hunter Dunbar, but he's using a fake knife. And Dunbar plays his own tricks by acting, doing what he does best, by fooling Moose into thinking that if he lets him go, they're going to have a good time, he's going to be friends with him, the whole 9 yards. And instead of, just hitting him once and calling the police or incapacitating him, Hunter goes to the extreme. And it's a legitimately rough scene to watch. He takes his shotgun, he blows off Moose's fingers on one of his hands, and it's all done practically, by the way. Just fingers get blown off. It's a really rough scene to watch. And if that isn't bad enough, you got Moose screaming in pain and writhing around, and he's kicking him down the stairs, and then he grabs a knife and he stabs Moose in the eye. Stabs him in the fucking eye. And then he eventually stops because he realizes, like, holy fucking shit, like, I went way too far here. But yeah, he just went into slasher mode himself on Moose. And the cries of anguish by Travolta in this sequence of just pure anguish and pain are really unsettling. And that's a testament to Travolta's strength as an actor, because it's believable. You buy that he's in an immense amount of pain and anguish. And because Moose's character had gotten a little bit of a scuffle with the maid who was beating on him because he was sneaking around in Hunter Dunbar's backyard, and Moose doesn't know how to handle these situations, so he just tried to push her away to get away from him. Well, when he pushed her away, she hit her head on a bird bath and broke her neck. Moose isn't really aware of the fact that she's actually dead. He just thinks that she has a little bit of a nosebleed. So then he goes on as if nothing had ever happened. Well, as the days go by, and then you have this whole thing with Moose tying up Hunter Dunbar, Hunter breaks out and then attacks Moose. Well, the cops come, and because the gardener essentially sold out Hunter Dunbar and said that he was having an affair with the maid, and they found the body. So now Hunter Dunbar, as soon as he lets Moose go, he ends up getting arrested by the police for murdering his maid. And Moose he's stumbling through the streets of Hollywood, bleeding profusely, and just in an immense amount of pain. His friend, Leah, she finds him, takes him with her to go get treatment or whatever. And the last shot of the film is Hunter Dunbar getting arrested for murder. And then you have, like, the chalkboard, the chalk drawings that have been spliced throughout the film as transitions. You have one of them that shows Moose as kind of a folk hero, which I don't really get. And you have Leia's narration again. And then it's just like one of those things you're like, that's the ending? Like, that, it doesn't even feel like the movie even ended at all. Like, really? Here's how I would have personally ended the film. You could have still had the whole thing where he gets arrested, Hunter Dunbar gets arrested for murdering his maid, but then I would have a sequence where you would have Moose admitting to the police that he was the one that killed the maid. He did it by accident. He just wanted her to stop hitting him. Didn't want her to read the letter. Only wanted Hunter to read the letter. And he didn't know she was dead. So he admits to doing it, which lets Hunter Dunbar go free. Moose serves time in prison, of course, after all his wounds and all his stuff is healed. And then I would end the film with Moose getting a package in the mail when he's back home with Leia from Hunter Dunbar. And it's an autographed piece of memorabilia or something. And Hunter has signed it, and he has the words, "Thank you, you sick son of a bitch." You know, something like that. To kind of show that Moose has learned his lesson, so has Hunter Dunbar. Things end in a way where everything is tied up and doesn't feel like there's a bunch of loose ends. So that's how I would have personally ended the film. And still would have tied into the overall tone of the film, and still would have been able to do a lot of the more intense moments that Fred Durst was trying to show in the film, but by giving it an actual ending. I think the film would definitely be better if it had an actual ending like that, because a lot of critics are justified when they say that this movie feels incomplete, because it really does. Because the ending just feels like things just abruptly end, and things aren't really tied together or tied up, and you're just left scratching your head. So anyway, I've talked about this movie longer than probably anyone's talked about this movie, at least in a serious manner. So I don't know what else to say about the Fanatic, if I can even say the word, apparently. Except if I were to rate the film out of 5 stars, I give it 3 out of 5. I think it's an average, meh, independent horror thriller with some good performances by Devon Sawa and John Travolta, but plenty of warts. And one of those movies that could have been better, but in all honesty, could have been much, much worse. But anyway, thank you for watching my review. Thanks for your cooperation, and have a nice day.